What's up, guys? Keith here, coming at you from my Carolina Mountain Lights workshop. And today we're going to start the second video in my 3-video series on the 20-foot mega twig tree. Now, I have to admit I got a little bit of a head start on this. I have already completed the first section of it. I did this because I wanted to work out all the kinks in it and make sure I gave everybody accurate information before I started the how-to video. I'll try to open it up here without poking my eyes out and give you a little look at it. This section is about 5 foot tall. See if I can give you a little close-up of it here. You can see these connectors here. I designed and made these myself. And I made them to where this would work the same way as a store-bought twig tree would. So it'll fold up for easy storage. I'll show you how I made these here in a little bit. The wire here is obviously the 9-gauge galvanized steel wire that I've showed you in a previous video. And then this first section is mounted on a 1.5" PVC. Now if you watch my first video, you'll know that each of these 3 sections are going to graduate up. This one is 1.5 inches, the next one will be 2 inches, and the last one will be 3 inches. And that's just for stability. Let me fold this up and we'll get started here. I can do it. As you can see, like I said, it folds up nicely for easy storage. Just like the store-bought twig trees. Now, to get started here, first thing I had to do was to make this top one compatible with my first section. This is one that I used in my show last year. Went real well. 2811 pixels on it. Looked really nice. The trunk on this, a 3/4 inch PVC pipe, slides on it perfectly. No play, good and tight. So what I did is I put a short piece of 3/4 inch on there, ran some self-drilling screws in to hold it snug, and then I took my 3/4 inch to 1.5 inch adapter and glued it onto the 3/4 inch. It can be put on permanently here. This connector will allow it to adapt to the 1.5 inch PVC. These 2 pieces you do not want to glue together because this is where you're going to want to take it apart every year. Okay. As I said, in this section we'll go down to a 2-inch piece. You'll see I've already put the connector and glued it on here. Pardon the noise. I can glue this on, but the next section, that's where we will reconnect it every year, so that won't be glued on. When I put these together for the show, I'll probably run screws in here. If I don't, they're probably, the wind will blow them apart. So anyway, there are 3 parts to this, not counting the connectors. You got the trunk, you got the twig connectors, and you got the twigs themselves. Now let me grab a piece of PVC here, the 2-inch, and we'll go ahead and get started on the second section. Now I've already cut this piece of 2-inch to length. It's also a 5-inch piece. This is the 2-inch to 3-inch connector. I'll take and glue that on the bottom here, and that'll get our allow us to adapt to the 3-inch PVC. Now the first thing you want to do on this is to lay out where your twigs are going to be. Now, a couple of things you have to take into consideration. First, we go ahead and connect this to the piece of the section I've already made. Between each row here, you want the same distance all the way up. So we can take our ruler and our marking pen, and if we measure, we'll see there's 6 inches between each row. So I come down here to the next section, mark it off, and that's where my first row is going to start. Now, something you need to take into consideration when you make these connections, this connector has to be centered in the middle of these 2 rows enough to where it will not get in the way of mounting these twigs when you get ready to mount them. You don't want to mount your twigs on top of the connector. That could get kind of nasty. Okay. Another thing you want to take into consideration is you don't want these rows to line up perfectly. You want them to stagger a little bit. Gives you the fullness of the tree. So what I did, I took and drew a line all the way up a PVC. And what we're going to do here is when we lay out our rows, we're going to put a twig on one side starting on this row, and then on the next row it's going to start just on the other side. That'll give us that staggered look. Alright, now as far as laying out the twigs, this is a seamstress's soft tape measure. I actually stole it from my wife's sewing room, so she don't know it yet. So we're going to take, also I guess I should say on this one here, the bottom row of this pre-made one has 6 twigs on it. The first 4 rows on this one I've already made, I had 6 twigs on. From there on, I went up to 7 twigs. Now, when we're building this thing all the way down, we need to every now and then go up a twig to maintain the fullness of the tree. So right now, I'm at 7 twigs. I'm gonna go 7 twigs for probably 3 more rows, and I'm gonna go up to 8 twigs. So what we're gonna do here is get a measurement all the way around our PVC, and we find out that 7.5 inches. We're putting 7 twigs on here, so it's going to be a little over 1 inch between each twig. So we'll go ahead and start 1/2 inch on this side of the line here, and then we'll start marking off a little over 1 inch on each one. And there we have our 7 twigs laid out. And we can take our ruler, we'll go ahead and lay out the rest of the rows here. Like I said, 6 inches between each row. So next one. And we'll do this all the way down. Now this first piece that I've already done had 10 rows on it. This one came out to 9 rows. I'm thinking by the time I get through with this tree, it's probably going to be more like 18.5 foot rather than 20 foot. Which is just fine. It's still going to be amazing. All right, that gets all the rows laid out. Now it's just a matter of going back and marking off each of the twig positions, just like I showed you on the first row. And on this next row, like I said, we'll start it right here on the line. Started this one 1/2 inch to the side, start this one on the line, and then start marking off our positions. A little over 1 inch each. Okay, now as I told you, first 3 rows here I'm going to do 7 twigs on. From here, I'm going to take it up to 8 twigs. Got to maintain that fullness in the tree. Okay, as you can see, got all my twig locations marked out here. So we're going to lay this aside right now, and I'm going to show you how to do the twigs themselves. You would think I would do the connectors next, but I want to save that for last because it's the most difficult, most time-consuming part of this, even though it is fairly easy once you see how it's done. Twigs themselves are very easy. Like I say, I use this 9-gauge galvanized steel wire, very strong wire. It's actually the same gauge wire that is used in the store-bought twig trees. Maybe just a hair heavier, which is a good thing because once you get to the longer twigs, you know, you're going to need the strength because it will start to get a little saggy. At that point, that's probably where I'll double up on this wire. But the twigs themselves will increase by 1.5 inches on each row. That way you'll maintain that symmetry in the tree all the way down. The last twig on the last row in the section I've already made was 37.5 inches long. So this next one is going to be about 39 inches long. Now, we also have to take into consideration the increase in the size of the PVC, which is going to stand it out about another 1/4 inch on each side. So we'll take 1/4 inch away from that. That gives us 38 3/4. Now, we have to turn around and add 3/4 inch back because this bend down here where you connect it to the connector is going to take up about 3/4 inch, so you got to allow for that. So that means this next piece, after all is said and done, is going to be about 39.5 inches long. So get you a good straight area on your workbench. Start straightening this stuff out. Probably do better to get you a pair of pliers, but I've done so much of this, I got used to just doing it with my hands. It is very strong wire, and I highly recommend it. If you didn't see my other videos, this wire is called Ook, O-O-K. I bought it at Walmart on sale for $6.62 a roll for a 50-foot roll. So it's fairly cheap. I'll straighten one out real quick here for you. I'm not going to get it perfect because I don't think you want to stand there or sit there and watch me achieve perfection on this. So right there is 39.5 inches. Let me get my wire cutters. Sorry about that. Okay, flip that up. And that's how easy it is to make a twig. The end that you're going to connect to the connector, you got to have a ring to run a screw, or I'm actually going to do some experimenting with using rivets on it. But I'll have that experiment completed before I actually video putting this together. Just take and grab it. It's very strong, very hard to do. I suggest a pair of needle nose pliers. Works pretty good for me, heavy duty ones. If you don't use heavy duty ones, they will break it. And that's how you bend it out. That is the complete twig made that fast. That's the easy part. For this section here, it took 64 twigs. 62 or 64. Actually, I think it was 62. And I basically sat up in my living room on the couch watching TV, straightening out wire, making twigs. Yeah, came out in no time. Okay. So that completes the trunk and the twig. Now we're going to get into the connectors. This is the part that I've had the most questions about. People are very interested in finding out how I made these. I actually designed this myself. It's very simple, very easy to do, but it's very time consuming. So let's get right to that. Okay, as for our connectors, this will give you a little better idea of what they look like. Oops, sorry. That is the finished product. Yes, I did paint it, because once you start cutting on these things, even though it's galvanized steel, when you start cutting on it, you remove that protective coating on it and it will rust. So I'll put a little coat of paint on it. Okay. These connectors are made out of heavy gauge sheet metal. Now, most people, if they look around hard enough, can find a scrap piece of heavy gauge sheet metal pretty much anywhere. I just happen to have some on my property here from an old steel building I used to have here that collapsed. This here is what it looked like. If I remember right, this is 29 gauge galvanized steel. It's about the thickest sheet metal that you can get. You know, if they make it thicker, I don't know if this is pretty strong stuff here. Okay. Now, to get this, first thing we're going to have to do is take our sheet metal and cut it into strips. Strips will look similar to this. I'll show you just in a minute how I did this. Now, I cut mine on a table saw. I took a metal cutting blade that I got from Home Depot for about $5 a piece. These things will wear down, so I bought 2 of them, $10, no big deal. And put this on my table saw, set up my guide, and ran these strips off in just a few minutes. I'll show you how I did that here in just a minute. A couple things you need to remember. One, if you're like I am and cut a lot of wood on your table saw, you're going to want to clean up the sawdust on it. This metal cutting blade will throw a lot of sparks, and sparks and sawdust do not mix. You know, I might be talking down a little to you there, but it's a good reminder for anybody. Clean your sawdust out before you start cutting metal on your table saw. Also wear your eye protection and gloves, because it will pop back on you and burn you. Okay, let's move over to the table saw and I'll show you how I cut these strips. Okay, so this is what we ended up with on cutting our strips out of the scrap sheet metal. I've got probably 200 or more twigs to do here, so I've cut up plenty of them. It should do me. Now, for those of you wanting measurements, cut these anywhere from 5/8 to 3/4 of an inch wide. This part of the cut does not have to be exact. You'll see what I'm talking about once we start putting these things on. Now the remainder of the cuts do need to be close to exact. The next one we want is we want a 2.5 inch piece off of these strips. Now what I did is I took a piece of tape and laid it out exactly 2.5 inches from my blade here, so I can line this up on the tape and zip them right out one after the other. And it actually goes pretty quick. So I'll show you how I do that. So as you can see, I've whipped out about 4 of these in just a matter of less than a minute. This is the basic piece of metal, that you're going to use to shape these connectors. Now at this point, you're probably going to want to take and do some cleaning up on these. There's a lot of rough edges on these where I did these cuts. And that's very easy. These blades, they work as a kind of a grinding tool as well. Gives you a nice clean piece to work with here. Okay, at this point we got to go over here and do some marking on these so we know where to bend them and where to drill the holes in them. So let's move on back over to the workbench. Okay, for those of you who think you might want to try this, I want to give you very detailed information on how it's done. This is the connector. It's the diagram I drew up and printed out. You'll see down here, this is the actual finished product. We'll give you something to reference by. The overall piece that we just finished cutting is 3/4 inch high, 2.5 inches long. There's going to be 4 places in this that we'll be bending to get these 2 bends here and the 2 for the outside connections. The first bend, you'll measure 3/8 of an inch in from each side. This dashed line here shows where the bend will be, 3/8 inch in from each side. An additional 5/8 inches from that on each side will be your second 2 bends. Here in the middle, you will see I have 7/16 here. That is the depth of this groove that's going to be cut in here. I'll show you how to do that after we get all this laid out. These 4 circles here, those are where you run the screw in to hold the twig on. And these 2 here are for actually connecting to the PVC pipe. So I'll leave this up for a few more seconds in case you want to pause the video and print it out or write down the measurements. Okay, now that you have all the measurements, you'll see here I drew up kind of a template on my workbench here. We can lay this piece that we cut down on it, and you'll see I have the lines already drawn out here where I can take and lay my piece down and mark the lines right onto it, if I can get it straight here. Like I say, there's 4 bends in here. I have all 4 lines. It's easy as that. Now the center part where we're going to cut that groove, we actually have to do that with the ruler. It's 7/16 of an inch deep. So I just lay my ruler on there, get my measurement, and that'll give us the mark where we're going to grind out. And I'll show you how to do that here in a little bit. We will actually use the same blade that we used to cut this piece with. As I told you before, it has a kind of a grinding effect to it, so we'll be able to grind that right out. Okay, we have we're not going to bend this thing till the very last. Right now, we want to get this ground out and get the 4 holes drilled. So we'll move over here to the drill press, and I will show you exactly how I set up to drill out those 4 holes. Okay, I've got my drill press all set up here. You'll see this backstop that I've set up here. This allows me to drill all 4 holes just by sliding the piece back and forth. The depth down of the hole is already measured by this backstop. So we can whip out 4 holes drilled pretty quick. So I'll show you how it's done. Okay, you'll notice how the position that these holes are drilled in kind of matches the picture that I showed you earlier. That's because these holes here you want a little higher to center over top of the ground out space. These mounting holes, you want a little bit lower, because when you mount them, that'll get the screw out of the way whenever you're running these screws in. You'll see what I mean whenever we actually do the mounting on it. The holes here are 3/16 inch. Now if you decide to do this, the size that you use will depend on the size screw or rivet that you use to connect the twigs with. As I said, I'm going to be doing a test of using rivets to connect the twigs. Up till now I've used 8/32 3/4 inch screws and nuts to attach the twig. That gets a little expensive and a little time consuming. I'm hoping if this rivets, if it does work, it will save time and save money. Okay, now we'll move on back over to the table saw and I'll show you how we ground out this centerpiece. Okay, grinding out this center part here is basically just a matter of making a series of cuts in here, side by side. As I said before, this blade, rough, has kind of a grinding effect on the outside edge here. So this does come out fairly easily. You get you a pair of heavy duty pliers to hold this thing because it will get hot pretty quick. And just that quick, grinds it right out. This pretty much gives us a finished piece, with the exception of the bends we have to do in it. So let's go back over to the workbench and I'll show you that part. Okay, bending this thing into shape is just a matter of taking a pair of needle nose pliers and laying them on the line and bending the proper way. These two outside ones are obviously going to bend up. Lay the pliers on the line. Like I said, this is fairly strong metal, but it is sheet metal, so it bends pretty easy. And these center lines are obviously going to bend down. And you can do a little adjusting here and there as you see fit. And that pretty much gives us a completed connector, with the exception of painting, of course. As you see, these two holes line up right together. That's where the screw or rivet will go in to hold your twig on. And these holes will mount right onto the PVC. And I'll show you how that's done here shortly. Okay, I did try the test using rivets to connect these two together, and unfortunately it didn't work as I had hoped it would. I might do some further testing with that in the future to see if I can figure out a bit different way of doing it. But for right now, we're going to keep using the screws on it. This here is an 832 3/4 inch screw. Fits perfectly into the 3/16 hole. Actually, you could take your hole just a hair smaller if you wanted to. But to connect the twig to the connector, you want to lay it with the, I guess you would say, the ring of the twig up where the flat part's down, because you want the flat part to rest right here. Just put it on there. Run the screw all the way through. And put your nut on. Well, trying to get it on here. There we go. As far as tightening this down, you can tighten it down to just right before the sides of the metal meet the twig. You do want to tighten this down pretty good for two reasons. One, you don't want the nut to come off. And two, this area right in here, you want these two parts to be as close together as possible, because when you mount this on the PVC, you're going to find out that these connectors butt right up against each other. It's a pretty tight squeeze in there, so you want to reduce the width of this as much as possible. So we'll move over here and I'll show you how to actually connect these to the PVC. Now, before I actually attach this twig here, I wanted to explain something to you that I mentioned just a few minutes ago. We're talking about these connectors. Whenever you screw them down tight enough to make this as narrow as possible. If you look at this section that I've already completed, look closely at these, you will see that actually in some places they're overlapping each other. That's how tight these can fit sometimes. Now, we did go up to a 2-inch trunk on this next section, which will give a little more space. However, that will be just for the first 3 levels, because those 3 levels will still have 7 twigs on it. On the 4th level, I'll be going up to 8 twigs. So it will be cramped again like this. So again, tighten this down enough to where this is as narrow as possible. Now, to attach this to the trunk, you remember we already have all our positions marked off for our twigs. So it's basically just centering it on your mark. I'm using self-drilling screws for this. Now, these self-drilling screws are a little more expensive. They do help somewhat, but you can go with the cheaper screws if you choose to. Just depends on how much work you want to put into it. Well, we'll get this thing centered. Already got my drill set up with a Phillips bit on it. If I can keep the screw in place. Let's try starting this side. And it's as simple as that. Now, something I also mentioned earlier, I was talking to, now these are connectors that I did earlier to start with. And this is where I found out I needed to offset my holes a little bit. You'll notice on the design that I showed you, the holes on the outside are a little bit lower than the ones that hold on the twig. And you'll see here the reason for that is when I go to put this screw in this hole, this screw is going to be in the way. Offsetting them a little bit takes that problem out of the way. Well, and that's it. Okay guys, so we're going to call it a wrap on this video. A lot of you are going to ask, well, why didn't you show us how to put on the pixels? I do have my own specific way that I solder and mount my pixels on here, but this video has gotten so long I wanted to go ahead and move that to the third video, the reveal video, and that one I'll be showing you the finished product, then I'll be showing you how I put my lights on it, and then I'll do a sequence with it and we'll actually get to see what this thing's going to do. So keep your eyes out for the last video and we'll see you then guys. Thanks for watching.